Could a masked vigilante exist in today's society, fighting crime and injustice? And by trying to achieve superhero status ourselves, what can we learn to become better humans? This is the Vigilante Superstar Podcast.
Hey, Johnny, welcome to the Vigilante Superstar Podcast. Thanks for jumping on today.
Yes, thanks for inviting me, Matt.
So why don't you take, what I've been kind of doing is just taking the first couple minutes just to talk about, who you are, what you do. You obviously were and are appearing in the film that I'm working on. But we had a lot of great conversation. I think it was probably a couple of years ago already. But why don't you just fill us in a little bit on what you do and what brings you to this podcast?
So I'm a detective with one of the many law enforcement agencies in the Chicago metropolitan area, which, as you know, it's the fourth largest in North America. And I've been on the job for 24 years. Also, I work with a collective of other investigators, regional investigators that work on cases like burglary, theft, and fraud with a nexus to like local and like transnational traveling crime groups. So during my career, I've investigated like crimes ranging from petty theft to homicide.
And did you start out on as more of a beat cop, like initially, and then became a detective?
Yeah, I spent half my career as a beat cop in uniform, and just for the past 7 years, I've been working plainclothes as a detective.
Cool. So what's the, I think we talked about this a little bit, probably off the cuff, back a couple of years ago, but what's the climate right now in a large city like Chicago or that area, in terms of, crime? We hear lots of things on social media. Is crime really escalating, or is it not? Is it certain types of crime? Do you feel like there's support for police? I mean, I know I support the police, but I know there's been lots of political stuff there with not backing the police. But do you think, what's the climate like right now?
So the FBI in their annual crime trend reports say that violent crime is down. They're also saying that, there's certain crimes that are on the rise, like property crimes, burglaries, domestic related crimes are up. But I can honestly tell you that, just speaking and working with a lot of my victims and witnesses for some of these cases that I'm working on, I mean, I think there is a undeniable climate of fear. I have friends that won't go into the city anymore because they're afraid they're going to get carjacked, or they're afraid that they're going to get robbed. And I mean, that fear is real. I mean, I still go in the city. I love my city. But there is this climate of fear with a lot of people. In regards to like what police are doing to try and tamper down that fear, I think we're doing the best we can. But the reality of it is that I feel like there's less of us, and what we're expected to do is like doubled since I started. Basically, we're working more with less, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, when you ask me about do we have like the backing, I mean, I would say that the people I work for, the community I serve, I would say that they're overwhelmingly supportive of what we do. And I could probably say that like in some of the other areas where I don't work, but I have colleagues that work there, that their community supports them.
That's great.
But in some communities, there's this fear of, retaliation from gangs that have or like people in the drug game that have been a part of that community for so long that they're just afraid to call 911. So,
do you think that criminals? I mean, this is, again, I'm going off of my limited social media exposure and what you see hyped up on the news. It seems like, at least in some of the larger cities, we hear a lot about California, New York, and some Chicago too. Do criminals right now feel a little more emboldened than maybe they had in the past to commit some of these smaller crimes, to damage property, loot, carjacks, or carjackings, I should say. Is that the vibe, or is that just something that's been kind of blown up in the media?
What I'm seeing, and this is since, since COVID, since the unrest of like 2020, I have been seeing a lot more people, committing crimes and continuing to commit the same types of crimes. You have, and it's more organized too. You have
Yeah.
groups of individuals that will work together and, just walk into a store and just like empty out like a couple
Yeah.
shelves of like retail merchandise, and they're making probably maybe $10,000 to $20,000 worth of merchandise, like in that one,
Yeah.
you know, that one incident.
Hmm.
So I would say so that they are emboldened to commit these crimes. You know, we have a justice system in place. Is it perfect? No. It's hard to work around, but it is a system that we have, and I
Right.
work in it. But like the one of the issues I think that I have right now, we had in Illinois, we have what's known as the Safety Act. There's some good things about it. There's also some issues with it as well. I mean, take for example, like a mouse, right? You have a mouse problem in your house. So what do? You set up mouse traps, right?
Hmm.
And like your mouse trap will catch these mice, won't really punish them, they'll trap them. And then like people will let them out. What are the mice going to do? They're going to come back to the house, right?
Right. Right.
So,
Right.
I mean, that's kind of like what I'm seeing right now, like with
Yeah.
the criminal mindset is that, you know what, I'm going to get out, and then I'm all good. We're going to, go back to doing what we're doing, you know.
Is it multiple? Is it three strikes? I've heard of the Safety Act. I remember when I heard it, depending on who you listen to on the radio or podcast, people are like saying it's absolutely horrible. And then other people are saying, no, it's good. It's good for the community. Are, is it kind of, if you repeat offend, is it like restorative where it kind of goes up the level? If you do three crimes within a certain amount of time, does it eventually put you away? Does it do something to the penalty?
Safety Act is like over 700 plus
Sounds like
pages
government. Yeah, it sounds like.
of legal. Yeah, and it's something to note is that this is like a law that was passed like in the middle of the
Mhm.
night when most people are
I
asleep,
did hear that.
and I don't think a lot of people. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people had a lot of input into maybe
Yeah.
arguing for that bill. So, and that's
Yeah.
just my opinion of the Safety Act. Again, I think
Sure.
there's some good
Yeah.
things about it, and but there's just so many
Hmm.
issues with it that I mean I think it would take
Yeah.
forever to
Yeah. I know.
discuss. But um, where I am seeing is that a lot of people are, one of the things that the Safety Act eliminated was
Mhm.
cash bail. And there's plenty of good reasons why they should
Right.
eliminate cash bail. But for like repeat offenders, that again, like I go back to that analogy with the
Hmm.
mouse traps. If they're just gonna,
Yeah.
they come back, and I don't think it
Yeah.
works. But that's my
Yeah. Unless they're
opinion.
really being reformed somehow. I mean, it seems like a lot of these folks you hear about that
Right.
are sometimes repeating or even committing heinous crimes. You hear, oh, they had done this before, or they had done this multiple times leading up to
Right.
this, and they got out. Whether it was cashless bail or whatever. And we're not the only state dealing with these kinds of things. And I think it kind of tends to be, maybe I'm wrong, but like a bigger city, it seems to gravitate towards these bigger cities. Like there's a lot of problems in LA and San Francisco and New York, Baltimore. It seems like where there's a lot more of just that. Maybe there's just more opportunity for crime in those locations too. I'm sure there's just more of that.
Right.
Do we were talking about this tour we went on, but people are feeling fear. And some people are cowering. Lately, my algorithm has been showing me all these subway incidents. Obviously, there was the Daniel Penny story where he just recently got off for that, where he had, put that guy in chokehold on the subway. But I'm seeing other videos now of people borderline assaulting people on subway, and people are very afraid. Do you think, and have you in any way seen? We were just talking about the situation with the CEO, but do you think by us not intervening enough, from a legal standpoint, do you think people are going to possibly, or have you witnessed or seen or heard of situations where people are starting to take the law into their own hands, which can become very dangerous, becomes the Wild West, I would imagine.
Or, I mean, like in our state, we have
Mhm.
concealed carry. We're one of the last states to have concealed carry for citizens. And what I'm seeing a lot more of is like road rage
Yeah.
incidences. Um, and that's
Mhm.
unfortunate because, when things can be resolved with just words, I think people are just resorting to, displaying their
Yeah.
guns. And is it becoming like the Wild West?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah. I mean, and if you go to some
So,
states, Texas, everyone's like literally everybody's armed. And yeah, and
wow.
it isn't. I was at a martial arts class this past week, and I was talking to a guy, and he made a comment like, well, he's an older guy, he's like 60, he's learning Thai boxing, and he's like, yeah, this is cool, it's good for my body, but he's like, realistically, like, they're just gonna shoot me. So it's like I'm learning these martial arts, but it's like someone's just gonna pull a gun on me if anything ever happens. So I'm just gonna back away and protect myself. But and that's the fear, right? Is people are gonna if everyone's armed, maybe that's a deterrent. I mean, you could look at it that way, but yeah, I think it can lead to more of those kind of issues too. And I think people are also probably afraid to act because depending on the situation, I mean, every situation is so unique. And I've seen situations where people like Daniel Penny, he acted, he was trained to act, and that went really off the rails for him for a while. And now you see people being, I think Kathy Hochul's been saying, oh, our subway is safe, but there's so many issues on that subway. And people are being assaulted and pushed and shoved and attacked and people in their face. And nobody really wants to engage. I mean, and I totally get it. Um, and so that's, I think, the danger of not having a safe subway system, of not having safe streets. I think people, especially if they're armed, could take matters into their own hands. What is legal in terms of, just for people who don't know, I think this is kind of interesting. When you do see a situation and you intervene, what is legal for you as a bystander? If someone's being assaulted and you intervene, if someone's trying to steal your car, someone breaks into your house. I know they're all different scenarios, but what are you allowed to do as a private citizen to protect your home, your family?
Honestly, I don't know what the exact law is or like what the
Yeah,
verbiage is, but I would imagine that there would be, an expectation of reasonableness. I mean, if you're a police, if I'm a police officer and I'm, fighting with somebody on the street, on a public way, and there's somebody there that can reasonably help me, and I'm asking for help, then yeah, there's an expectation there for somebody to help, and do the right thing. But in terms of like what the legal threshold, what the requirements are, I'm not
yeah,
sure of what it is here in Illinois. But in California, it used to be a law that somebody could be in trouble for not helping the police. But I think that law has since been
yeah,
repealed.
yeah. I
So
I think when I talked to Steve, who was an attorney, he said it's something about equal force. So if you're wrestling someone, you're wrestling. You're not going to pick up a brick and smash their head in. That would be unreasonable. That would get you in trouble. I
right.
know there's some laws like castle law. I'm going to say this. I'm sure I'm going to butcher this, but within your home in certain states, I want to say Texas probably because that is the Wild West on there. Like if you break into someone's house, you
Yep.
can be shot, and it's legal to do so. I believe there's something like that. But I've also heard here that if someone breaks your house and they're running away from you and you shoot them, and you shoot them in the back, or even if they're climbing out of your window and you shoot them in the back, like you're going to be in huge trouble. So it is, we talk about this vigilante stuff and it's fun in the comics and the movies and people take matters in their own hands. But the reality is you do have to be pretty careful about, especially if we have these guys who are UFC fighters or special forces or police officers who really know how to handle themselves. And I think that puts you in this other category. What was that movie with Nicolas Cage, Con Air? Remember, did you ever see Con Air, where
Oh,
his hands were
you are.
lethal weapons because he was a special forces guy and he killed a guy just protecting his wife and ends up going to jail for that. But yeah, I would imagine, and I think generally speaking, it's got to be equal amounts of force that you're. Yeah.
I think it goes back to, again, like what we were talking about,
Yeah.
reasonableness. Like somebody breaks into my house and I happen to have my gun in my hand as he's breaking into my house. He sees me, sees the gun, and then turns around. I can't
Right.
just shoot him, you know. So, I mean, unless I see a gun in his
Right.
hand, um, then it's force on
That's the word. That's
force,
the right.
and that I think that's the expectation in
Yeah.
this state, at least. So, yeah, I would imagine that you got to be justified. I mean, that's taking
Sure.
somebody's life. You need to have good reason
Right.
to do that.
And I think even just to bring up Daniel Penny again, that was what they were trying to figure out. Was he was saying, well, people on the train, a lot of those people testified, and that's why he got off, that we felt really unsafe with this guy. And he said, hey, I wasn't trying. He felt bad about actually hurting a guy or killing the guy. He didn't want to do that, but he felt like he had to act. And I think that's hopefully not where we're headed more of, because I feel like there's so much that can go wrong, like you said, with road rage and people really trying to, because the reality is most people aren't trained and most people aren't able to restrain. Even if, that brings us to this vigilante conversation. So obviously the movie that I'm making is about the fantasy of, could a Batman type character exist? And that kind of segues nicely into, if you had someone like, let's say, a Batman type character, even if he was highly trained, talk to me about some of the issues legally. And this is where you kind of typically break the fantasy of like, oh, could Batman exist? And then you talk to someone in law enforcement and they kind of humble you and they say, no, probably not. What are some of the issues that like that type of superhero character would run into in a real society?
Well, so like we look at the Batman
Mhm.
storyline, right? We have this vigilante in a mask. He's actually working with the Gotham
Right.
Police Department, right? I mean, like the chief, the commissioner knows Batman, they're friends. He puts up a signal, Batman come out. You would never see that in any American
Yeah.
city. I mean, it's
Yeah.
fantastical at best. But yeah, I think there's no way. I mean, it opens up a lot of
Mhm.
liability to like police departments. And police departments train in a certain way. They have policy that they're
Right.
supposed to adhere to. Um, and that's, Batman is on
Mhm.
his own, agenda. So and again, we have a justice system in place. Is it perfect? No. But it's something that we as law enforcement agencies have to work with.
Yeah. And I mean,
And that doesn't
no,
include
no, no,
vigilantism.
no, not so much. But yeah, I mean, I think we had talked when we talked about this. I'd asked you some questions about what kinds of things would Batman be doing illegally, and it's like a lot, because even people may or may not know this, but I think the way you guys even collect evidence has to be done within protocols, I would assume. And Batman's just swooping in, taking out a warehouse, delivers some bad guys to the front steps of the cops. It's like what is that going to do? Because those guys are going to get off anyway, because there's no evidence that was collected properly. One of the guys I talked to, I think he was a Marine. He said, yeah, the thing to do would be to like take pictures, maybe collect evidence, and then just deliver that to get people pointed in that direction. Might be a better, like, surveillance, that type of thing would be a better way to go than beating a bunch of guys up, tying them together like we've seen in the comic books, and then like the police come and arrest everybody, because those guys would get off, I would assume.
Well, everything that we do in a criminal investigation is going to get
Right.
scrutinized no matter what. How we collect evidence, where the evidence came from, and even like our interactions with the public. Like whenever we have to use force, every move that we make has to be documented. Well, what did you do first? Well, I gave verbal directions to ask this person to stop what they're doing, and then I place. It
Right.
escalates, to the point of like that lethal use of force, and it gets heavily scrutinized in court.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think to be Batman, you would have to, you'd have to trespass constantly. You would have to sneak around in private property that you're not supposed to be in. You would be covering your face, so you're not identifiable. I know there's this whole. I've got some people that follow me on social media. The whole real life superhero movement. I don't know if you know much about that, but if you look on my Instagram page, you'll see a lot of those guys follow the movie. And it's interesting, like there's this whole subculture of people that do dress up and do walk around, but they really operate in a way where it's a little more like neighborhood watch, because they most of the cops know them. They might wear masks and have fun with the costumes and all that. And they might even carry medical kits and a taser, and they might even wear Kevlar, but they always identify themselves to police. The police know who they are. They might hand out water to homeless or blankets and do some of those kind of things. But the real fantasy of like Batman taking down the mafia and taking down gangs and thwarting a bank robbery, so many laws would be broken, and that I'm sure that there'd be a giant manhunt for that person, just as if anybody committed a crime, whether it was justified or they felt it was justified or not. Kind of that Robin Hood mentality. I mean, we would still go after them. I'm sure we would do everything we could to capture that person.
I mean, I think as you could see with the incident with
Yeah.
the CEO being a victim, that I mean, the amount of law enforcement personnel that was just dedicated to trying to find out who that shooter was and locating him. There was a manhunt
Yeah.
for him, and I think can a vigilante exist? They
Yeah.
could try. They could certainly try, but I think in the end, you have like the full weight of U.S. law
Yeah.
enforcement that will hunt you
Well, that was
down.
the kind of the consensus too. Again, we've talked about how this is really kind of a fantastical conversation. It's fun. It's a fun conversation that lots of people like to have. The idea
Yeah.
of I mean, we love those stories, right? Like all the superhero stories, the origin of you were wronged, something bad happened, you're going to go get vengeance on those people and get your vengeance and get justice. And the legal system is supposed to be set up to do that in a proper way, because we can't have it just be the Wild West. And Batman would ultimately be breaking laws. And even if you were highly trained, this came up before, even if you knew how to fight and you were like almost a professional fighter, if you knew how to restrain, like one of the guys I talked to said, you being able to not hurt someone too badly is part of the training. Like I could really hurt someone, but when you've trained and you've sparred and you've fought and you've done all these things, you know how to like pull back where, okay, this guy's down and he's restrained or he's hurt. But even if someone fell and hit their head on a curb, I mean, now you've committed a murder, and that takes it to another level. And that's the way I approached the movie. Was he would have to be non-lethal, and that's Batman's character, unless it's the Zack Snyder Batman. That Batman is pretty nasty and lethal. But if you were going out and just more maiming people, or restraining people or blowing up drugs and freeing trafficked victims and people like that, we do have people that do those kind of things. But it's usually sanctioned, and by someone, I would imagine. And there's things that go on. Some of the special forces guys who are still kind of in the community they say, yeah, I mean, some of these things do happen. We do rescue trafficked kids. We do take down cartels. We do some of these clandestine missions that people don't even know about. So in a way, we're doing this kind of stuff, but it's generally sanctioned. It's in a team. There's intel communication. It's very well thought out. And that was the thinking too with the way I approached it. Was if you were going to have a Batman, maybe you could do it briefly, but I think in time, very quickly, you would be caught. I mean, surveillance alone.
Much
I mean,
surveillance technology. I mean, people are so attached to their cell phones now, is that it's become part of them. Where their cell phones are is where they are. I mean, there are some criminals that have found a way around that.
yeah, I think you were saying too, like vigilantism can look different. We have, there are people out there that just use computers, and will thwart, whether it's a pedophile ring or I've heard some of these stories of taking down, like just destroying like more, scammers. Like I love watching those YouTube videos where these hackers will scam the scammer and take their money and delete their files and destroy their. I mean, that's a form of vigilantism. And I know Rosa Parks had come up in one of the interviews I did, and the Boston Tea Party. I mean, there's been some righteous things that have happened through history that people have been like, enough is enough. We're going to do this. But I think when you're talking purely about a Batman type character, it gets a little crazy. But just for fun, what kind of things do you think that character, just based on kind of your expertise, what would that type of character, what kind of traits would they need to have? And how could it be possible even for a brief amount of time, do you think?
So, like, in terms of like a vigilante, like a more realistic type
Yeah,
vigilante, I
like
think,
let's say we had a dude running around in a with a mask and the attack and doing the Batman thing. What would how would they even begin to move in that direction? Like what would it take? Because that's really what the movie's about, is all the different facets of how that could work.
right?
Because we've talked about how it probably could work. But what kind of traits would they need? What kind of skills? Maybe again, this is just coming from your expertise, like kind of your arena, which is more law enforcement.
Like, you know, a person like Batman, obviously, you probably need like the physical attributes, the strength, obviously, the money to have all those gadgets. But I think what's important is somebody who can't be detected and somebody who's tech savvy, somebody who
Right.
understands like technology with like cell phones, um, and like cell phone towers, that
Mhm.
understands and can be away from their cell phone device. Somebody who understands social media, um, people that just are more tech savvy now.
Yeah, you said, I think when I talked to you, you said that you guys use social media a lot because people just put everything on there, and I'm sure with what you guys have in your databases and your software and the thing, I know there's a lot of open source stuff too. I mean, the average person can go look at a crime map. The average person can go look at sex offenders in their neighborhood. The average person can look up a lot of that stuff. But I'm sure you guys, I would guess you have, for a big city like Chicago, like an entire area of people that are just online. Oh, this guy said he's going to do this here. We're going to check that out. Like, I would imagine, because people are always talking, right? I mean, people are chatting and bragging or posting. It amazes me. I work at a high school. It amazes me what kids post, even at that smaller level. They'll do something really stupid. We had a horrible bullying incident last year, really horrible, like one of the worst things I've seen. They filmed the whole thing, and it went out to the entire community, and the community was outraged. Um, and because it happened out of school, it made it complicated for school authorities to act. But they had to call the sheriff. I mean, it was a huge mess. But they film everything. They film everything. And so I would imagine you guys use that as a huge tool now.
People's lives are all on social media now. I mean, it's like everything you do, vacations. That's what it used to be like, posting your vacation pics. Now it's like, what, I'm gonna beat up Shorty and we're gonna throw down at like 3 o'clock after school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like you get to be a whole crowd there. And you
Yep.
know, it's everybody's lives are just on social media now, whether it's like
Yeah.
Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok or Snapchat. People are doing drug deals on Snapchat, and it's madness.
But yeah, so, and also too, with your job, I mean, what, again, Batman is in the newest Batman movie, the one Matt Reeves made. They're making another one of those. He was the detective, and that's what I think is the cool parallel. And that's really, the original comics with Batman was Detective Comics, DC Detective Comics, where Batman was kind of the original kind of Cape Crusader, kind of solving crimes, and he was a detective, and he had all the gadgets and had the computer and all this kind of stuff. And we saw that in the 1966 Batman with the big weird bat computer, and that was more tongue in cheek and satirical. But um, what kind of things make for a good investigator? What kind of things make a good detective? And how it wouldn't even be in my world, and you can speak to this too. If Batman's totally in his own, he's not being helped by the police, or he's not helping the police, how would he even investigate a crime scene? And how would he even get access to a crime scene? That's the kind of stuff. But what kind of traits do you need to be a good detective in the first place?
When I first started, there was an art, I think, to investigating somebody, interviewing and interrogating somebody. I'm not talking about torture interrogation. I'm talking about
Right. Yeah.
the mythology of interrogation. There was a system that, there's an art form that, you were able to craft as a detective, as an investigator, learning how to speak to people, understanding, showing a little bit of compassion when you need to. Um, and, early on as a detective, I conducted hundreds of interviews with suspects. And, oftentimes, yeah, I'd get confessions. Sometimes I wouldn't. But body language, like understanding body language,
Hmm.
was a trait that you needed as a detective, as an investigator. But I'm telling you now, there's a new type of investigator out there that is tech savvy, that is social media savvy, that understands like all of what entails to find somebody online.
Right.
And that's something that, a lot of these younger detectives have experience in.
Mhm. And but I'm sure you have like a division of people working on that as well too, right? That you work coordinating with, or is it up to the detective? Like, do you have to do some of that as well as get out there and interview and visit like locations and you guys don't do necessarily crime scene investigation, but you'll obviously visit a crime scene and look at a crime scene and study a crime scene, I would imagine. So that would all be things that, if Batman was going to be a detective, he would have to be able to do. And that's where I think it gets complicated because if there was a murder, that's going to be he'd have to almost come in covertly in disguise. Like there's no way you would get access to a crime scene like that. And so that's another one of those things that's just kind of like fantastical where you always see Batman later on go in with just little special gadgets and look at the crime scene and figure stuff out the cops couldn't figure out. That stuff seems kind of far-fetched to me because I feel like you guys have the best tech, the best people working on those things that are already studying those crime scenes. But yeah, it's I think you're right. I think you would have to have the full package of, I think the big one is anonymity. Anonymity in this modern, like 30, 40 years ago, different story. I think now it would be so hard. I mean, I know you guys don't catch every criminal or everybody out there. It's not 100%, perfect game to go catch every criminal that commits an act. It's virtually impossible to do that, I would imagine. But and you guys are working multiple cases at the same time, I would imagine also. But it seems like anonymity would be the biggest issue, getting from place to place, being completely secret, being invisible online, which can be done. But I feel like this brought in the conversation of having a team. The way we approached in the movie was he has kind of a three, like it's him and two other people because he has a hacker that does all of his computer stuff for him. And then he has kind of the mentor trainer person who's like teaching him tactics and fighting and all that. Like you would have to be like a full squad of people to really do anything like that. And like you said, there probably are legal ways you can help and be involved and do things. Even like we have these kind of private citizens who do these things online and try to find people and, have these Reddit groups and they all work together and they try to figure these things out. And there's probably some good for that. And there are good Samaritans that step up in times of need. I'm sure in LA right now, with what's happening with the fires, there's been, I'm sure, some amazing acts of heroism from average citizens, and that stuff does happen, and it's inspirational to people. But yeah, I think I would leave it at this. What, because I feel like in going on this journey myself, interviewing all these people, it's made me almost in a self-help kind of way. I want to be more prepared, and I want to be. I mean, I have no background in military or law enforcement, but ever since I started this, I've been wanting to box. I wanted to learn how to box. And so I just recently this year was like, this is the year I'm going to do it. And so I started. And I just want to like take care of myself. I want to be mobile. With some of the guys I talked to, they were like, the best thing you can do is be able to run. Like, can you run away? Like, are you like, if something bad is happening, can you get from here to there, get away from it? And people were such an out of shape culture now, like we're just, and even just the little things of that, of just moving and getting yourself physically being strong enough to be able to, I'm getting older, I mean, I think you're around my age. I mean, like we're getting a little older and I just want to stay ready for those kind of things. Hopefully nothing ever happens, but just to be ready. What do you think, kind of as the self-help part of it, we look at a character like Batman, who does obviously all these great things in the comics, kind of paralleling that to the average Joe in his everyday life. What do you think the average Joe can do to make the world a little bit of a better place, to help his neighbor out? What kind of things come to mind in terms of that?
So recently I took a trip to London and like on one of my rides on the tube, which is a rail system, as soon as you get on board, they close the doors and there's like this automated message that comes up. And usually it's a person that says, if you see any suspicious crimes or anything suspicious going on, see it, say it, and sort it. So I think that's a good model for anybody here in this country to to do. I mean, if you see something that's not right or you think is not right, it looks fishy,
Mhm.
say something and, call 911 and then we'll sort it out as law enforcement. We may not make an arrest, but we'll address the issue in time. So yes, see it, say it, and sort it. I think it's
Yeah. What would you?
a good
What,
advice.
sorry. Yeah, I think that is good advice. What would you say to people who, and I've thought this way myself too at times, even with small neighborhood disturbances? Like, do I really want to get involved in this? Like, is this gonna make my life worse? Like, you see something happening, whether it's where I live, it's like vandalism or kids being in the woods back here drinking or doing something, and the police here are great, but they'll say, because we live kind of with this woods, and they'll always say, "Hey, call us anytime anything happens." I'm like, man, if I had called you every single time something happens back in these woods, like I would be calling you guys like every afternoon. And so, what do you say to the person that it just is like, I don't want to get involved. I don't want this. This is gonna be complicated for me. I don't want to act. I don't want to. What would you say to maybe spur them to act?
It's our job as police officers to respond to 911 calls. And
Mhm.
that's pretty much what keeps us in business. That's what keeps our jobs secure is we get 911 calls. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, if we didn't get 911 calls, if there's no need for us, we wouldn't have jobs. It's our job to respond, to do something.
Yeah.
So whether it's to just, take a drive by after they're gone or just to,
Mhm.
maybe check on people to see if maybe they're in some kind of medical distress or some kind of mental
Like,
health
right,
distress.
right.
You never know, and it's best just to say something and report it.
Yeah, I think that's the complicated thing now with, you see something happening and people just instantly think about all the negative things they've seen that have happened to people that have intervened. And I'm not saying like to necessarily physically intervene. You know, it would be. I think there are times where you probably do need to sort of physically intervene, but it's a scary thing to do because if you could be hurt, there's that fear. Some people don't have that fear. Um, but also that there's going to be like major blowback, you'll lose your job, legal ramifications. It can become a racial issue very easily now, where if it's a certain ethnicity and a certain ethnicity, it's going to create social media waves, and it's scary, to get involved. So I think that's the hard part. I think if you have training, if you have a background in law enforcement, military, fighting, whatever, like maybe you're more apt, you're more confident, you intervene. Because a lot of it, one of the SEALs I talked to said, confidence is a huge, huge like predictor of performance. Like how confident you are, like you can be all trained, but if you walk up to a door and you can't go through the door, to help someone or to, in case of special forces, to like breach a door, like if you can't get through the door, then what good is all the training? Like you have to have the confidence of knowing I can handle this situation, or if this guy comes at me, I can restrain him without seriously harming him. But I think that's the fear. I think that's the fear for a lot of people, with social media. And I think social media has like exacerbated that like tenfold,
Wow.
because we want a society that polices themselves to a degree, not in a violent way, but if we see something happening on the front out here, 911. We had, it's stupid, but we had these kids banging on our back window. We live near woods and people roam through here all the time. And at first I was like, it's teens. I work with teens. I don't care. But it kind of freaked my wife and my daughter out a little bit because they weren't ding dong ditching. They were like banging on our back window. And my son, this is a funny story. My son was in the infantry. He's just honorably discharged last year, and he's a doer, man. He's like, he scares me a little bit. Like he will take action. You know what I mean? And so we told him that it happened, and he's like, "Oh, gotta call the cops. You gotta chase those kids down." And I'm like, they're just kids ding dong ditching. They're. But then it happened again, and it kind of freaked out my daughter and my wife again. And so Zach happened to be home, and he was upstairs, and he jumped down the whole landing and jumped in his car and chased these kids down. And I was like a little scared because I was like, I don't want him to beat up a 16-year-old. He's 24 years old. And, but he pulled up and he like confronted these guys from his car and basically just was like, look, the police have been called. He was very aggressive with them verbally. I don't want to know what he said, but he basically like threatened them, like, do not come in my yard again. There'll be problems if you come in my yard again. And the police haven't called, and they're on their way. And we hadn't called the police. But the next day I called the police. They came out, and I told the officer, I'm like, here's what happened. the cop said, well, did they come back? And I'm like, well, I don't know if that worked yet. He's like, well, he's like, honestly, sometimes kids get called out like that. Like they have not come back. Well, it's been a year. They have not done that. So it's like, we were kind of scared in the moment, but he acted, and that was a place where I literally thought, oh my gosh, he's going to go like punch a teenager. I was kind of scared for a second, but he was verbally aggressive, but he didn't, take any physical action against these high school kids. And they were scared enough to not come back. And then we just logged a police report, but I wasn't even going to call the cops. And he's like, you got to report it. You just got to like log it. And I'm like, yeah, so we did. So, I mean, like things like that, like it's a small thing, but sometimes a little intervention. In that case, the cop was like, well, that might scare those teens. They may not do anything like that again because someone chased them down in a car and it was a little scary and they got caught. And, they thought about their consequences a bit. So, but yeah. So anyway, I think that's going to do it. Do you have any other thoughts on this topic at all, or?
Oh, I'm glad your son made it out there okay. Because, sometimes, I think it was just the right group of teens that he encountered that day. But some teens, I mean.
I know. That's why we were
Never
scared.
know.
I don't typically worry about him, but when it's 6 kids, you just don't know what's going to happen. And the issue now too with intervening, like even if you're in the right, like someone is doing something and you're trying to just even say something to that person, whether they're cutting in line, you're just trying to do like the ethical thing. You just don't know what people are going to do anymore, and how they're going to act. And they sometimes, like I was joking with my wife today, we saw a woman that didn't put a cart back at Trader Joe's. She left it like in the middle of the parking lot. And I was referencing these guys on Instagram who they're like the cart police. Their whole shtick is they put stickers on people's cars and say, sir, and they like play a siren and they go, you violated not putting your cart back. Every one of those videos they post, those people go ballistic. And it's like, it's a silly thing. They don't put their cart away. They're getting in their car. The guy usually walks up, they go, and they throw a magnet on the car. It sticks to it. It's like, did not put my cart away. And they're wearing vests and everything. It's a prank. But every one of those videos, the people get incredibly hostile. I mean, it's amazing how hostile people get. And that alone too is a deterrent sometimes of man, do I want to like, hey, can you please put your cart back? Or can you please wait your turn in line? And people just go, it's like when people feel like this, almost like it's like the guilt, like they just get so defensive and they just act and they lash out and that stuff can be scary. And then just imagine just amping that up to a more, if someone's armed or if it's in a more compromising area, situation, rougher group of people, like you said, you don't know who you're approaching. That can get pretty scary.
I have contact with somebody that's just got nothing left to lose. And this is the day that they're going to take somebody out for anything. And the risk is just not worth it.
No, I know. It's hard because I think you want people to do the right thing. You want to help people, or you want to help people that are being wronged. But it is a scarier world now with so many people, whether it's mental illness or they're armed or like you said, and people, I think more and more are becoming less communicative. We're seeing this in our politicians. I mean, people, they lash out, they personally attack. They can't have discourse anymore. It used to be maybe 40, 50 years ago, you could say, excuse me, sir, you cut in line. And, oh, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't, now it's in your face, and ready to go. And that's scary. So, well, hey, thanks for jumping on today. Always good conversation. Thanks for offering your expertise and insights on this kind of strange topic, but I think we talked about a lot of cool things here. So a lot of things people get something from. But again, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for the invite, man. I'm looking forward to seeing your project once it's all done.
We're getting there. I feel like I just keep telling people, just hold on, like it's coming. But it's going to take a little bit longer. But we're getting.